I would like to give you a little bit of information about how the gap of care came about. Being a minister, I was looking for a solution because I noticed when I was working with Dr. Corcoran and the many combat vets and their combat soldiers and vets and their families, I was noticing common denominators and even general experiences, noticing common denominators um, about them not being able to completely express or even have the opportunity to express their most profound life-changing experience called a near-death experience. What I noticed was the people that I was talking to had a lot of trepidation in discussing it. There was all kind of fears that came up. People won't believe them. They might be misdiagnosed. They might be ridiculed. And in cases for the combat soldiers, they didn't want to lose their security clearances. They didn't want to be deemed psycho and then lose their security clearances and then being put on psychotropic drugs. So in inspiration, I decided to just pray for a solution. Shortly thereafter, sometime in 2013, early part of 2013, I was inspired what the gap of care was, who it impacted, how it impacted, and how to close it. And that's how it began. So when I've been practicing the measures that are proposed in the NIB NDE symposium, now published in Voices, I found that it works. Very simple solutions. So I'd like to give you just a little bit of information. Let me begin with giving a definition of Dr. Greyson's a definition of the NDE. A near-death experience is a profound, life-changing, intensely emotional experience that usually occurs during a clinical crisis and has common characteristics and after effects. It is not a dream, hallucination, or mental illness. This is a very important definition given by an experienced researcher in near-death experience. And let me say, there are no predictive values about who's going to have a near-death experience. They happen to people all over the world, no matter how much money they make, how much education they've had, what race, what religion. And it's very important to know that they can happen for a variety of reasons, from a very extreme emotional traumatic experience to accidents, near drownings, combat, surgical procedures, and even childbirth. So what might a experiencer feel once they've had these profound life-changing experiences? They're in pain. They just had the most profound experience happen to them. They're confused. They're not sure what happened. They're needing answers to their questions. Now, depending whether they're in the hospital or they go to their primary care physician after the event, in the absence of the medical professionals and healthcare workers, be they paramedics, nurses, etc., in the absence of them being aware of the characteristics and the after effects of a near-death experience, they will have difficulty when a patient or an experiencer comes forward and starts discussing this very profound event that happened to them. So education is the cornerstone of actually preventing and closing the medical and spiritual gap of care for near-death experience patients. This starts in the medical training facilities. All healthcare medical training should include NDE, standardized NDE education, and have an SOP, a standard operating procedure of how to handle these experiences. That's not what's happening. And despite the 50 years of NDE research, despite this topic being discussed by IANDS for over 30 years, and other near-death experiences coming forward with their stories, the gap of care lives. That's why it is so important today to make it very clear that the IANDS efforts, the NIB's NDE symposium is going to be so important. It's going to be very important to disseminate this information and resources around the world, because once people are educated and they know, they can do. They need both to close the medical and spiritual gap of care. Also, I would like to say that these experiences also have a psychosocial and psychospiritual impact on the family. It's not just being impacted because you're the experiencer. There are life-changing traits, personality traits. They may not be as aggressive anymore. They don't want to be involved in conflicts. There's a change in personality. Sometimes that causes conflict in the family, marriages. Sometimes the marriages will dissolve under these big changes because they're saying, I didn't marry this person. This person is completely changed. So it's very important not only to validate, educate, and support the experiencer who has these experiences, but also educate the family so they can help the experiencer try to normalize their experience, to try to bring understanding to the family, to take time, let them share their experience, giving them opportunity to process and integrate and normalize their experience. In the absence of when an NDEr goes to a medical professional, in the absence of them having the opportunity to report their NDE, the patient is going to remain confused. They're going to be in emotional limbo, which eventually leads to depression and isolation because they had an event they can't explain. They don't understand why these changes happen. They don't have answers to their questions. So it's very important, especially when a patient at bedside, is to ask the experiencer, did you have anything unusual happen to you after surgery or during your trauma? This gives the patient the opportunity to share with that professional what they had gone through. The first thing to do is to, when a self-report comes forward, is even if the doctor or medical health professional does not believe personally in near-death experiences, that's not the point. The point is that it's real to the experiencer. The physician, care worker, or even a friend says, hey, I've heard about these experiences. Patients have reported these experiences. They're called near-death experiences. Can I give you some educational material? Or maybe just sit and listen to what the patient has to say. This helps validate them. Provide them with pamphlets or an NDE trained care professional, such as a social worker or clergy, who are most times are not aware of near-death experiences. They typically will either let the clergy or somebody else try to explain them. And sometimes what the clergy has done is they try to steer the experiencer into their faith. And an experiencer doesn't need judgment. They don't need what somebody else's personal beliefs are. They shouldn't be condemned or demeaned. What the person reaching out to the near-death experiencer needs to do is quietly listen, listen very carefully, let them tell their story completely. If you have questions that are relative to their experience, ask them, join in on the conversation, give them an opportunity to receive educational support through educational NDE, educational pamphlets, brochures. You can give them a NDE questionnaire so that the assessment can be made and the proper care professional could come in and to assist the near-death experiencer. And not just the experiencer, bring the family into it. Let them understand, let them be part of the educational process. So give them the opportunity to express their experience. I'm saying this to medical professionals, paramedics, to clergy, to even the general public. Learn about these experiences, learn about the characteristics and the after effects of an NDE. In this way, you can be part of the process of validating, educating, and supporting the near-death experiencer and their family. Part of the reason why we want to collect their stories is so that we can help them normalize their experience, to help them process and integrate it. If they don't have that opportunity, they may be facing depression, isolation for years. It normally takes up to 20 years to process and integrate a near-death experience. Imagine how helpful that would be, just to have you tell them what the experience was, as it was a near-death experience. And there's plenty of information out there about them. Direct them to IANDS, this NDE symposium, assist even to NDE radio with Lee Whitting, where there's 400 accounts of these experiences. IANDS has a plethora of NDE education, brochures, training, medical training videos for doctors and medical professionals. Just a wealth of resources. And I'm hoping that the NIB symposium will be the long arm reach, along with people contacting IANDS, to understand what this gap of care is, how it impacts patients and people who are not patients, because the majority of the NDE experiences happen outside of the hospital, and help close and prevent this gap of care. In the absence of people learning about this, they're not going to do anything about this. And the gap of care is going to live forever, forever. So I thank IANDS and Diane Corcoran for being major contributors to obtaining the open access of voices of the NIB's NDE symposium. That contains all the 18 NDE accounts and the 4 commentary authors. It's a brilliant publication. And I'd just like to briefly explain how that got started. I was contacted by the NIB to help them find NDErs. They were doing a symposium to see how the NDE experience, people who have NDE experiences while they're in the hospital, are impacted, and how the healthcare could best help the patient when they report these experiences. This came at a perfect time. I helped them find 2/3 of their candidates. I helped those candidates with writing their story. They were written in their own words. They were, the way the NIB handled this was the most professional, profound experience I've had in my life as an NDE educator and experiencer myself. It was very professional, very balanced. The happiest thing that came out of this, all the commentary authors had the same 12 NDE accounts to review. And we were encouraged to write it from our own position. We were not aware of anybody else's positions on those 12 accounts. At the end of it, all of us came up with the exact conclusion that not allowing a patient to report their near-death experience was a bioethical issue. Just like any other report that a patient gives to a doctor, it should be important to collect it. In the absence of doing that, the patient cannot resolve what happened to them, besides going through a very traumatic bodily or psychological situation. So I thank the NIB, I thank IANDS,